Upon release, Candace was functionally one of the worst 4-stars that Genshin Impact has ever made, being a downgrade to other characters in virtually every single scenario, and basically only having the most meme or niche uses possible. She does have a fairly interesting kit, however, leading many to hope that down the road more synergies would be introduced. And although she did get a couple new ones throughout Sumeru, it wasn't until very late into Fontaine and now Natlan that Candace has finally hit her stride. And since she's being given away as a free character, I wanted to talk about the brand new Candace teams and how she actually might be worth building for you. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. In case you don't remember or you don't know, Candace's original banner was actually alongside Cyno and Venti before Nilou and before Nahida. She really had almost no uses then. Once Nilou and Nahida were released, however, she had some very interesting and niche uses in that Nilou team, which I'll talk about later. And this is actually one of the very first videos I made that did really well when I showcased her all the way back then. I would say that the Nilou team is the only team that survived this video. I did talk about some other stuff, but even though this video didn't age crazy well, it still has a special place in my heart, especially now that Candace has gotten good again. Candace is actually a very strange kit, having a counter with her skill and a burst that gives a normal attack damage bonus, as well as a hydro infusion to your on-field character. With constellations, she gets additional improved hydro application, with her C6 giving actually lots more application, and her C1 extending the duration of the infusion. These three parts of her kit, the normal attack damage bonus, the hydro application, and the hydro infusion, all contribute to some very interesting, albeit fairly niche uses. But even though they are niche, they are very powerful. To go through her constellations quickly, C1 extends her infusion for 3 seconds, which is very important for the Nilou variant. You need at least Constellation 1 to play her on the Nilou team, in my opinion. C2 increases her max HP, which gives her more damage, very unimportant overall. C3 talent level, very unimportant. C4 reduces her skill cooldown, not really a big deal for most teams. C5, another talent. And C6 is the big one. It gives a similar sort of coordinated normal attack that Sing Shou kind of does. It doesn't apply hydro nearly as fast, however, so depending on how fast your character's pyro application is, they may or may not be able to vape their normal attacks with this. It does apply in AoE though, so although it's not as consistent as Xingqiu or Yulan for someone like Arlecchino, it has much more AoE potential, so this is ideal if you're using her in an Arlecchino team to get more vaporizes. The too long didn't read is basically it just gives you more hydro application for more consistent vapes. So we're going to talk about each of her teams next and give you a build guide for each team, as she is constructed differently for each one. First of all, my very favorite Candace team is definitely the Mualani team. What I like about it most is just how easy it is to play. It's one of the easiest Mualani teams that you have. The great thing about Candace on this team is that your investment doesn't matter at all. Whether you have a C0 or a C6 Candace, she will perform perfectly well on this team. In fact, technically non-C6 Candace can be considered to be slightly better, especially if you're playing with a pyro applicator other than Xiangling. But personally, I do use Xiangling with my Mualani, and I've never missed a vape due to Candace's hydro application, even at C6. So if you are C6 Candace, no worries here. On paper, this is one of Mualani's very best teams. I tend to prefer Constellation 1 Mona just very slightly, but I really like Candace on this team. She's really good. In an ideal world, you play Xilonen on the Scroll artifact set. You give Candace the Archaic Petra artifact set. After Xilonen creates a Crystallize, so you use Mualani's normal attack or a quick Sharky Bite, then create a Crystallize with Shilonen's skill, then you pick up the Crystallize with Candace while she's on the Archaic Petra artifact set. This will boost Mualani's damage by 35% elemental damage bonus. Very powerful, a little bit noodly to actually pick up, a little bit annoying, but very good. She also gives Hydro Resonance to Mualani, and she of course gives that normal attack bonus. This bonus isn't affected by her level. It isn't affected by her damage. It isn't affected by her HP. So her build, other than being on the Archaic Petra artifact set, doesn't matter on this team. You just need to build a ton of ER to be able to burst off of cooldown. So I generally just recommend giving her Favonius Lance, making sure she has enough crit rate to proc it, and calling it a day. Since basically no one's damage matters except for Mualani here, you can even put Xiangling on the Instructor's artifact set, or you can put her on Emblem of Severed Fates if you're having trouble getting the energy recharge requirement up to where it needs to be to burst every rotation on Instructors, which is definitely an issue for a lot of players. Overall, team is extremely strong, definitely one of Mualani's best teams, and this is such a cool free-to-play friendly team, with Xilonen being basically a staple, Mualani being able to use free-to-play weapons, and then Xiangling not even needing C4 on this team, as even her Constellation 0 Pyronado provides a long enough duration for Mualani to vape all of her hits if you're tight with things. So highly recommend this team if you want to build it. I do also expect it to get even better with the Pyro Archon. Next is Arlecchino. This was Candace's return to glory originally, and I think this team has gotten even better with Xilonen. Kazuha was great, but I really like the extra crystallize here and there that Xilonen can give you for that extra interruption resistance. And if you don't need the grouping, obviously if you need the grouping, then Kazuha is going to be far and away better. And if you don't need the grouping, Shilonen's buff lasting a bit longer and making for easier setups is a bit ideal. The cool thing about Candace here is that you don't need to worry about buffing her damage. So unlike with Yelan, you don't need some double crystallized setup to max damage. Candace is just buffing Arlecchino, and this is basically a perfect choice for a lot of the abysses that we've been having lately, where there is some AoE, but they're kind of grouped up already, and there's multi-wave, so you don't need to do any switching and reapplying anything. On this team, you're going to build Candace differently than on the Mualani team. You could do Archaic Petra for sure, but I prefer to use Instructors instead. Archaic Petra will definitely work, but whenever I can avoid doing the crystallized pickup thing, I would prefer to avoid it. So I like to run her on the 4-star artifact Instructors here. Once again, just like the last team, you want to build as much energy recharge as possible. 220 even was a little bit low, so if you're struggling to build energy recharge, you can go for Archaic Petra or even just Emblem. You're going to lose damage on your Arlecchino, and it does reduce the incentive to play Candace over someone like Xingqiu or Yelan. I think to really justify Candace here, she needs to wear one of those artifacts. If you're not using Xilonen and you are using Kazuha, you could consider the Scroll of the Hero Cinder City artifact set, which is the Natlan set that Xilonen wears. Obviously, only giving a 12% damage bonus is not great, but being unconditional is. And alternatively, you can put Bennett on your Instructor and then give Candace your Noblesse, because normally Bennett will be on the Noblesse artifact set on this team. And as usual, you're just building Candace with lots of ER. On this team, her investment matters a lot more, specifically your Constellation investment. You do need Constellation 6 to make this team work consistently. Don't recommend using Candace on an Arlecchino team unless you are a Constellation 6. But her HP stat, unless you're building for damage, it doesn't matter. Her level doesn't matter. Her talent levels don't matter. They don't matter for her buffing. Really cool thing about Candace, very resource-friendly character. Finally, the OG good Candace team that I featured on my video back in the day is the Nilou team. This team's really, really cool because Candace is using a completely different part of her kit. For the other two, she's using her normal attack buff, and on the Arlecchino team, she's using her Hydro application. For this one, she's using, yes, her Hydro application. It is good if you have C6, and it does make her one of the, I would say, overall better options for Nilou. Maybe not quite competing with the best options, but it's a very comfy and one of the better options, I would personally say. And giving that Hydro infusion to Yao Yao, you build Yao Yao on full Elemental Mastery. You ideally want Candace on the Instructor's artifact set once again on Favonius. Nahida, you can build her however, as long as she's on Deepwood. And you want to have enough ER to be able to always have your burst up, because you're on-fielding Yao Yao, who is actually your Dendro trigger. She infuses her spear with Hydro from Candace and then is triggering the Hydro blooms. Very, 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 very good. Very powerful. Still holds up. Still easily clears the Abyss. I got some of, not quite my best Nilou clears with this team. I still found Kokomi and Kale to be superior in damage. Granted, the way I was playing my Kokomi was on full EM, and so the healing was not a little bit suspect. This team is very comfortable. Even with Yao Yao on a full EM build, she gives an absolute ton of healing, being on field and normal attacking. So overall, this is a very comfortable and very consistent team. you need at least minimum Constellation 1 Candace to use this team. Otherwise, her infusion just doesn't last long enough. Ideally C6, but it is absolutely usable and 36 starable and clearable without C6. For the build guide for Candace on the Nilou team, instructors, like I said, I like to go with Favonius Lance, and you need to level 90 her. That is absolutely imperative. The other teams, it doesn't matter what the level is, but for Nilou, it 100% needs to be level 90, as when she does trigger blooms, which she will, not as many as Yao Yao, it's not as important as Yao Yao, but she still does trigger blooms, and from going from 80 to 90, you get like a 30% damage bonus. You can go to 89 to save some resources if you want. For more Cope Candace teams that I don't specifically recommend, but she does have synergy of, this is a fun one. You use Candace and infuse Xingqiu's normal attacks with Hydro. You can use Bennett, you stand in Bennett's circle and normal attack with Xingqiu. If you're a big fan of Xingqiu, this might be a team for you because he's on field doing damage, but you know, using Farina is sort of better, because infusing Xingqiu with Pyro is really not worse. And overall, it's just a Cope team. It's not that good. You can use her to apply Hydro for yoimiya or other Pyro DPSs. You do need some sort of secondary Hydro to have enough Hydro to vape. So whether that's Farina or Yulan or Xingqiu or whoever, again, not that good because Candace's best feature is applying an AoE and buffing normal attacks. Yoimiya buffs normal attack. Yoimiya does normal attacks but doesn't do AoE. Hu Tao really wants charge attacks, and she doesn't have that good of AoE either. So overall, better to stick to Arlecchino. You can use her on Ayato teams, like Giga buffing Ayato, sort of an Ayato hyper carry with Candace, Farina, Shalonen. Shalonen's buffing Farina and Ayato. The thing about these sorts of teams is although they kind of work, Ayato isn't really worth hyper buffing, and you'd rather just use a sub DPS like Yulan. You'd get a lot more damage out of Yulan, especially since Shalonen would be buffing Yulan on this team. So overall, not super recommended. There's other things you can do. I've done a plunge Candace. If you want to see plunge Candace, I lost my footage for it, but you can see it in my Shen Yun guide. So you can go watch my Shen Yun guide if you want to see plunge Candace. That was pretty funny. I don't remember exactly how much I liked it. I think it was like funny and all right. It was funny to see Candace like vape plunge kind of thing. Here's the thing. If we look at value and power level, that's the next section. Value and power level, like it used to be that it was just kind of some super niche things like Nilou, or you do some like super Cope hyper bloom. I think the hyper bloom that I did was I used Kuki on field and infused her normal attack with Hydro. So you'd get a bit more Hydro application, and then you'd get buffed by Nahida's burst and do more hyper bloom damage. The thing is, there's so many better hyper bloom things that you can do, but it is kind of funny, I guess. But aside from those niche little things that she used to do, like she's not as niche as she used to be. 3 really good teams and one of the better options for those teams. Mualani is not a fan favorite right now. I suspect she could be when we get a replacement for Xiangling with Mawika. But it is still one of the better Mualani teams, and even if you don't like Mualani, she's definitely one of the stronger DPSs in the game. I have her as my 3rd pick for top 3. I have Arlecchino as my top 2. So Candace having one of Arlecchino's better teams, potentially her best team in the right niche, being AoE vaping, multi-wave with this kind of thing. That's pretty good. And then Nilou, not a top meta pick anymore, but still a very good character and a very good team and one of Nilou's better teams. So I don't know that I could call Candace super niche anymore. She's still a little bit niche, but most characters are getting more and more niche as time goes on these days. So the fact that she has 3 teams and all of them being really higher up in the meta, I don't think it's Cope to say that Candace is actually like a pretty good character now. She's not a broken character. She's no Shalonen, but I would put her solidly in like tier 2. She's not a Cope character anymore. She's actually a solid character. Like, she has some top teams. You can't say that about all that many characters overall. So should you build her? Yeah, if you want to play one of these 3 teams, you should build her. For Mualani and Arlecchino, she's extremely cheap and efficient to build. So if you have Mualani teams, if you have Arlecchino teams, definitely build yourself a Candace. If you happen to have C6 for Arlecchino, if you have Mualani, you have a free one, you'd need to build your Candace just to try it out, because it's literally no investment to get her working. You definitely want an Archaic Petra artifact set regardless. You're gonna need Favonius Lance, so yeah. And for Arlecchino, as long as you have C6, definitely worth it. Needs barely an investment, just ER. And for Nilou, it does take some talent books, but unless you already are, unless you're using Nilou's absolute premium team, I definitely would recommend using this one. It's a really, really good option. So I like Candace a lot. Also, one of the best designs in the game. She looks absolutely amazing. And it's nice to see that, I don't know if Hoyoverse intended to have Candace make a comeback, if they had all these potential uses in mind, but I really like the fact that they create characters, regardless of whether it was intended or not, they create characters with enough depth and enough complexity that even if they're not good right away, as long as they have some interesting stuff in their kit, that down the road they could become useful. And that's definitely the case with Candace. She has 3 great teams now, so go ahead and build her. Let me know if you're going to build her. Let me know what you think about Candace. Take care. Bye for now.